Hi everyone, welcome back to Difference Frames the World, a channel that offers a unique perspective on global events. We analyze big international moves in straightforward words and upload videos daily. Here is Clara again. Nice to meet you on air. Today, we're diving into a story that's deceptively simple on the surface: chips, car manufacturing, and export bans. Still, when we zoom out, it reveals a whole world of geopolitics, industrial strategy, and economic ripple effects that touch ordinary drivers, car buyers, and entire national economies. Now, let's unpack the saga of Nexperia, its parent company Wingtech Technology, the Dutch and Chinese governments, and how a decision made in The Hague almost sent car production lines around the world into shutdown. First things first, who is Nexperia, and why should we care? Although few people have heard of the company, the vehicle one drives or might buy in the next few years likely has its components inside. Nexperia is a semiconductor manufacturer headquartered in Nijmegen, the Netherlands. However, Wingtech Technology, a Chinese firm, owns it in full. They are not producing the sleek AI chips we hear about in the headlines. Instead, they're creating more ordinary or less well-known chips, transistors, diodes, and discrete logic devices, things that may sound boring but are fundamental to modern vehicles. According to research firm Tech Insights, in the automotive chip segment, which encompasses transistors and diodes, Nexperia holds approximately 40% of the global market share. That means nearly half the industry is relying on one player. Why does that matter? Because when building a modern car, or any car with electronics, we need these parts. Power control modules, braking systems, dash electronics, and lighting controls, among other systems, all rely on discrete semiconductors. Without them, the assembly line comes to a halt, and vehicle deliveries are delayed. Here's where things start to get interesting and messy. In late September 2025, the Dutch government intervened and effectively assumed control of Nexperia's governance under an emergency statute known as the Goods Availability Act. This law had never been used before in history. The Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs cited concerns that Nexperia's Chinese parent, Wingtech, might transfer crucial technological knowledge out of Europe or drain value in a way that threatened Dutch and EU economic security. It is a rare move, as governments don't casually step into the control of a private firm unless they believe something bigger is at stake. The threat was not just about one company, it was about the supply of essential components for the entire automotive sector and the broader tech industrial ecosystem in Europe. In parallel, the US had already placed Wingtech on its entity list and, in late September, extended a rule: any company that is 50% or more owned by a listed firm would also be subject to US export controls. That meant Nexperia was directly affected. Thus, we have a triangle: US export controls, Dutch intervention, and Chinese reaction. And then, the ripple effects hit automakers. Almost immediately after the Dutch intervention, the Chinese government retaliated. On October 4, 2025, China's Ministry of Commerce imposed export controls on Nexperia's Chinese unit and its subcontractors, specifically prohibiting the export of finished components and subassemblies manufactured in China. Although Nexperia's front-end production is located in Europe, a large portion, reportedly 70%, of its packaging, testing, and assembly is conducted in China. By blocking exports, China effectively created an industrial choke point in the supply of Nexperia parts to automakers globally. Automakers began to issue warnings. The risk of parts shortages, production delays, and even shutdown of assembly lines loomed. The disruption would not be months away; some suggested it could hit within weeks. In short, supply chain risk has shifted from what if to when. Automakers are not just making steel and rubber, they rely on an incredibly complex and highly regulated supply chain where timing, quality, and certifications all matter. If one supplier of chips stops, whole modules can't be completed, and whole vehicles can't be built. For example, the 2021 chip shortage, which occurred during the pandemic, resulted in millions fewer vehicles being produced. The same dynamic is now repeating in a different form: governance and export controls, rather than pandemic logistics. Associations, such as the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, are warning members that their chip inventories may only last a few weeks. They emphasized the need for swift and pragmatic solutions. Automakers have already worked hard to diversify, but when one company holds a significant share of a market segment, such as 40%, diversification is not easy. Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, leaders of the G2 superpowers, met 10 days ago in South Korea. According to multiple sources, the Nexperia issue was on the agenda. As part of the broader trade and tech truce, China agreed to begin granting exemption licenses for Nexperia exports. Following the meeting, China's Ministry of Commerce issued a statement saying, "As a responsible major country, China fully considers the security and stability of the domestic and international supply chain. We will comprehensively consider the actual situation of the companies and grant exemptions to eligible exports." The Chinese also criticized the Dutch government's unprecedented control of Nexperia. The Dutch Economic Affairs Ministry said they remain in contact with the Chinese authorities and our international partners to work toward a constructive solution that is good for Nexperia and our economies. The immediate crisis may be averted but not entirely resolved. There's good news: chips are starting to flow again. For instance, German auto supplier Aumovio confirmed that it received an exemption license from China and resumed shipments of Nexperia chips. But here's the caveat: the process is still incomplete. Automakers caution that even though shipments are restarting, it will take weeks for volumes to return to normal. Some companies are operating on reserve inventory; they haven't yet shifted away from just-in-case mode. And while China has said it will grant exemptions, it also criticized the Netherlands for continuing its unilateral interference. The Dutch government's inappropriate interference in the company's internal affairs had led to the current chaos in the global supply chain. In short, the immediate danger is off, but the structural issues remain. Supply chains are shaken, confidence has eroded, and companies are re-evaluating their strategies. It is a global supply chain crisis, but it affects ordinary people. When the supply of new cars tightens, two things happen: fewer rebates and discounts, and higher prices. In the US, the average new car price recently reached record levels, in the low $38,000 range and climbing, due to tight supply chains. New car production constraints mean rental fleets are not replenished as frequently, resulting in fewer 1- or 2-year-old vehicles entering the used market, which keeps supply low and drives up used car prices. All this feeds inflation. If a particular model heavily relies on Nexperia chips, buyers may experience longer wait times, fewer available trims, or higher must-have options to secure delivery. This story serves as a sharp reminder that the hidden components, the ones often overlooked, are often the most vulnerable. The quality of electronics in your car depends on global sourcing, political stability, and export rules. Since cars, new or used, form a significant component of household spending, disruptions in this sector ripple into broader inflation statistics, interest rate policy, and consumer sentiment. Beyond the crisis-averted headline, this episode leaves us with bigger takeaways. We often think of supply chains in terms of logistics, costs, and just-in-time inventory. However, as the Nexperia case demonstrates, they're also battlegrounds for technology sovereignty, export controls, and national security. Governments are intervening more, and companies must adapt. When one company, like Nexperia, holds around 40% share of a segment, things get tricky. Automakers may diversify their suppliers, but when a supplier sits at the intersection of multiple jurisdictions, such as the Netherlands, China, and the US export control, the risk is amplified. It is worth noting that low tech does not mean low importance. One screw matters, let alone chips. The chips at issue are not glamorous AI brain chips, but basic discrete semiconductors. Yet their absence would stop car assembly lines. The Dutch using a Cold War-era law, China using export controls, and the US entity list expansion, all reflect that governments are willing to intervene in strategic industries. Companies in these sectors must view regulation and geopolitics as integral to the risk management strategy. For automotive manufacturers and suppliers, the focus will shift more toward supplier diversification, buffer inventory, nearshoring or friendshoring of chip supply, certifying alternative parts, and redesigning architectures to reduce single-point dependencies. Here's the story in one sentence: a little-known Dutch chipmaker, owned by a Chinese firm, was seized by the Dutch government over governance and tech security concerns. China retaliated by halting exports of that company's chips. The global auto industry braced for disruption. Diplomacy intervened. Exemptions were granted. The crisis is rolling back, but the landscape has changed. For automakers, it was a wake-up call. For consumers, it meant, and still means, higher prices and tighter availability. For governments, it illustrated that supply chains are strategic, not just economic. China holds more power than it appears, and the US and its Western allies are not as strong as they seem. Thanks for watching this episode from DFTW. If you found this helpful, give us a thumbs up, share it with someone and subscribe to our channel.